I understand your hatred towards me. You perceive me as selfish, manipulative, a heartless sister who robbed her siblings' dreams. In your eyes, I'm someone who would ruthlessly step on others to achieve my goals. And perhaps, there's truth in that. But consider this. What if I had no alternative? What if I revealed that I was raised in an environment where only one child could earn approval, where failure wasn't an option, where my existence was never truly my own? Would you see things differently? I'm Claudette Watson, and this is my confession, the tale of someone compelled to excel, even when it meant crushing others along the way. As the firstborn daughter in a household obsessed with achievement, I learned early. My parents dismissed emotions and childhood pleasures as irrelevant. Performance was all that counted. Imperfection, vulnerability, or straying from their idealized vision of me was forbidden. My mother's words still echo, "Failure is not an option. You're either the best or you're worthless." Those words became my truth. I dedicated my existence to becoming their flawless creation, the daughter they could showcase with pride. And Rosalie? My sister lived free from these chains. She never faced pressure to achieve perfect scores consistently. She wasn't forced to rehearse presentations until dawn broke. She had the luxury of making mistakes. I didn't. Then Rosalie began to flourish. Initially, I dismissed it. She'd always been the shadow child, existing quietly within our family dynamics. But gradually, I noticed the transformation. She'd found her path through Grandpa Joe, the sole family member who defied my parents' rigid standards. Grandpa Joe recognized Rosalie's potential when others missed it. He began mentoring her in commerce, market strategies, and economic principles, domains that were meant to be my territory. I knew then what needed to be done. I had to extinguish her aspirations before they fully bloomed. So, I seized her education fund. Label me the antagonist. Direct your anger at me. But answer this. If you'd spent your lifetime defending your position, would you willingly surrender it to another? When you see me on platforms, receiving accolades, beaming under spotlights, you might envision complete fulfillment. But reality differs. I've never experienced genuine joy, because failure was never permitted in my world. For as long as memory serves, my existence has never truly been my own. It belonged to my parents' ambitions, to our family's standing, to the crushing weight of expectations that followed my every step. Can you fathom what it's like when success isn't just desired, but demanded? When excellence isn't a choice, but the only path available? I lived in what appeared to be a magnificent palace, but in reality, it was nothing more than an exquisite prison. I wasn't raised to experience childhood. I was cultivated to be my parents' greatest achievement. My mother, razor-sharp and relentlessly driven, despised anything less than perfection. Once a rising star in the modeling world, she sacrificed her career for marriage to my father, an esteemed attorney. She was determined that if she couldn't reach the pinnacle of success, her daughter absolutely would. From my earliest days, I was sculpted into their vision of perfection. Not merely a well-mannered child, but a champion. At 5, my mother drilled me in deportment, the art of carrying myself with grace and sophistication. At 7, she selected ballet as my designated activity, befitting a young lady of status. My personal preferences were irrelevant. At 10, I was schooled in the art of eloquence, how to command attention, how to leave an indelible impression, how to dominate every conversation. Leisure was an alien concept. There were no simple pleasures like animated movies under warm blankets, no carefree moments in playgrounds. Instead, my world consisted of instructors, trainers, and an endless parade of commitments. Every action needed to serve a greater purpose. My father, though less vocal, wielded silence as his weapon. His mere glance carried the weight of judgment. First place earned a subtle nod of acceptance. Second place? His wordless disappointment cut deeper than any verbal criticism ever could. I had to be number 1. Do you imagine being the flawless child as a gift? Do you think universal admiration brings happiness? Let me tell you, it's a burden. Because excellence, once achieved, becomes your eternal prison. Nobody witnessed the sleepless nights spent preparing for crucial exams, rehearsing speeches until my voice grew hoarse, obsessing over competitions I couldn't afford to lose. Nobody saw the countless hours before mirrors, practicing single phrases repeatedly until they flowed with artificial perfection. Nobody understood the suffocating moments as my mother hovered nearby, scrutinizing every minor flaw in my bearing, my eating habits, my gestures, ensuring I would never falter in the public eye. People only saw Claudette Watson, the epitome of brilliance, the embodiment of perfection. But beneath that dazzling exterior lay a price so steep, few could comprehend its true cost. I wasn't permitted to display weakness. I wasn't allowed the luxury of errors. I wasn't given the right to acknowledge exhaustion. Because in this carefully constructed world, being second meant being invisible. Did Rosalie's presence stir jealousy within me? Never. How could I envy someone who never had to sprint through life the way I did, perpetually racing against impossible standards? Rosalie enjoyed freedoms I never knew existed. She could be average, unremarkable even. She had the liberty to falter, to learn from her mistakes, to lose herself in literature for hours without facing harsh reprimands. She wasn't labeled the golden child. She wasn't the vessel into which our parents poured their unfulfilled dreams. She was simply Rosalie. That's precisely why she remained beneath my notice. She posed no challenge. She presented no danger. Until her light began to outshine mine. The exact moment eludes me. Perhaps it started when Grandpa Joe chose her company over mine. Maybe it was when her timidity transformed into quiet confidence. Or possibly when our parents' gazes began lingering on her achievements with newfound interest. For the first time, I felt the ground beneath my perfect world trembling. If Rosalie proved herself capable, it would invalidate every sacrifice my parents had demanded of me. If Rosalie could radiate brilliance, what remained of my carefully crafted identity? I had dedicated every breath to maintaining an illusion of perfection. If Rosalie could achieve the same without the crushing pressure, what had my struggles been worth? I refused to allow it. I wouldn't let her eclipse me. I can pinpoint the exact second I looked at Rosalie and vowed she would forever remain in my shadow. She could persevere. She could dedicate herself. She could envision greatness. But I would ensure those aspirations crumbled before they could materialize. Immediate action wasn't necessary. I simply needed to bide my time, until the perfect moment presented itself. The transformation in Rosalie caught me off guard. Perhaps it began during her adolescence, when uncertainty gave way to self-assurance. Or maybe when she started expressing independent thoughts at family dinners, no longer content with silent agreement. Whatever triggered the change, I failed to recognize it soon enough. By the time realization dawned, the situation had become uncontrollable. Throughout our childhood, Rosalie existed as little more than a family footnote. She never sought the spotlight, never demanded recognition. She seemed content with her assigned role, or so I foolishly believed. I never truly saw Rosalie. Not because of indifference, but because she wasn't supposed to matter. My mother's words still echo in my mind. Claudette, you are the one who will elevate the Watson name. Rosalie? She can do whatever she wants, as long as it doesn't interfere with you. For years, this declaration shaped our reality. But then Rosalie began to radiate brilliance in ways I never anticipated. The transformation was subtle initially. Gradual shifts, her garden visits grew longer, her presence at family meals became sporadic. She no longer sought validation in our midst, because she had discovered her own sanctuary. And that sanctuary was with Grandpa Joe. Within our household, my parents established the boundaries, and I maintained them. But Grandpa Joe? He dismissed such constraints entirely. He was a peculiar soul, worlds apart from my parents' cultivated sophistication. He resided in that weathered residence on Maple Street, the one my mother constantly insisted needed updating, though he remained unmoved. Social standing, outward impressions, our family's stringent protocols, none of these concerned him. And most significantly, he remained indifferent to my existence. Unlike my parents, he never dubbed me the family's crown jewel. My accomplishments drew no praise from him, my ceremonies saw no trace of his presence, his eyes never held the reverence others showed. But with Rosalie? His gaze transformed her into something precious and rare. The revelation that Rosalie had spent hours at Grandpa Joe's residence struck me unexpectedly. Initially, I dismissed it. Surely she was merely indulging in his storytelling, as children often do. Yet her visits increased, and gradually Rosalie began to evolve. The bookworm who spent countless hours in solitude disappeared. She embraced pursuits I never imagined would capture her interest. One afternoon, I discovered Rosalie hunched over paperwork in our kitchen, her expression reflecting deep concentration. Approaching closer revealed a detailed investment analysis. I scoffed. What could you possibly understand about this? Without lifting her gaze, Rosalie replied, Grandpa Joe is teaching me financial management. I initially dismissed it as temporary fascination, destined to fade. But then I witnessed their daily collaborations, her absorption in his market insights, business principles, his authentic understanding of wealth creation. And that realization chilled me to my core. For the first time, I recognized in Rosalie genuine capability. Not the unremarkable potential she'd always possessed, but something tangible, something threatening. If Rosalie mastered business acumen, if she achieved success in this domain, my position as our parents' sole source of pride would crumble. I had invested my entire existence in crafting an impeccable reputation. I had sacrificed everything to achieve familial supremacy. But if Rosalie could match these accomplishments, if she could emerge from beneath my influence, then what would remain of my identity? The memory is etched permanently in my mind, the day Rosalie strode into our living room and declared her intention to pursue business studies. We were gathered around the dining table, a typical family scene. My mother discussed an upcoming social engagement requiring my presence, while my father remained absorbed in his digital correspondence. Then Rosalie, with unprecedented self-assurance, set aside her utensils and announced, I want to study business. This statement was met with eerie silence. My mother's expression contorted. Pardon? I want to study business, Rosalie reiterated, her voice unwavering. Grandpa Joe believes I possess natural aptitude. I've submitted my application to State University of New York. If accepted, that's the path I intend to follow. I recall responding with derisive laughter, as though her aspiration was utterly absurd. You actually believe you're capable of that? I sneered, my words laden with contempt. Yet Rosalie remained steadfast. Her gaze met mine, then our parents', with unwavering determination. In that moment, I understood she wasn't merely dreaming. She genuinely believed in her capability. That realization crystallized everything. I had to derail her ambitions, whatever the cost. For years, I'd dismissed Rosalie as inconsequential. That was when she remained the shy, withdrawn girl, perpetually hidden behind her mundane books, avoiding parental scrutiny. When she'd never contemplated emerging from my dominating presence. But circumstances had shifted dramatically. Her transformation was undeniable. She'd discovered ambition. And I couldn't permit that evolution. Rosalie's nature differed fundamentally from mine. She lacked my manipulative prowess, my ability to sway others through carefully chosen words. Her sole asset was her unwavering faith in Grandpa Joe's teachings. She genuinely believed she could succeed in business, forge her own destiny. More naively, she assumed our parents would embrace her choice. That assumption proved her critical error. Because I knew with absolute certainty that our parents opposed the idea of a daughter in business. Our parents prioritized social standing, prestige, and conventional career trajectories. Their aspirations centered on me, their exemplary daughter, excelling in law or politics. Business ventures were never considered acceptable. Yet Rosalie remained oblivious to these realities. Her naivete led her to believe that passion alone sufficed. My strategy required minimal effort. I simply needed to convince our parents that supporting her ambitions would prove futile. My mother and I maintained an evening ritual. While father remained immersed in work, we'd share tea and discuss future prospects. I leveraged these intimate moments to subtly implant my desired narrative. Do you think Rosalie's serious about pursuing business studies? I inquired casually, maintaining strategic subtlety. My mother lowered her teacup, her brow furrowing. Has she mentioned something? I've noticed her constant discussions about Grandpa Joe and investment strategies lately. I'm concerned about his growing influence on her. My mother's expression darkened. Her aversion to Grandpa Joe was well known. He embodied everything she despised, a maverick who charted his own course, dismissive of societal norms and appearances. In her eyes, such traits were unforgivable. Your observation troubles me as well, she admitted after a contemplative pause. Business isn't a reliable career path. We had meticulously mapped out her future. What's prompting this sudden deviation? I offered a calculated shrug. Perhaps it's Grandpa Joe's doing. He's filling her head with grandiose notions of success. That subtle suggestion was sufficient. It allowed my mother to draw her own conclusion that Rosalie was being led astray from the carefully orchestrated future they had envisioned. The seed of doubt was planted. All that remained was to watch it flourish. Several days passed before I identified the perfect opportunity to broach the subject with my father. Have you heard about Rosalie's business school aspirations? I mentioned offhandedly as he perused his morning newspaper. He glanced up, perplexed. What's this about? My mother immediately seized the opening. It's concerning, isn't it? Joe's influence has become excessive. I pressed on. You both always prioritized securing her future, correct? Rather than indulging this vague ambition, perhaps her $50,000 college fund could serve a more practical purpose. My father set aside his newspaper, intrigued. What are you suggesting? I maintained a carefully crafted air of nonchalance as I smiled. Contributing to my wedding expenses, for instance. That evening, when Rosalie entered the living room clutching her State University New York acceptance letter, I knew the moment of reckoning had arrived. She radiated joy, extending the document toward our mother. Mom, I've been accepted. Instead of celebration, she was met with my mother's weary sigh. My father placed his wine glass down, regarding her with evident disappointment. Rosalie, we need to discuss something. I reclined on the couch, arms crossed, observing silently. The family has reallocated your college fund to address more pressing matters, my mother announced dispassionately. It's been transferred to support your sister's wedding preparations. Rosalie stood motionless. Her grip on the letter tightened visibly, her expression mirroring profound betrayal. What? She whispered incredulously. Surely you understand, I interjected, my tone deliberately gentle yet patronizing. My wedding is a significant milestone. Education can always be postponed. Rosalie's gaze met mine. For the first time, I witnessed pure loathing in her eyes. But it hardly mattered. Because victory was mine. I believed that marked the conclusion. That Rosalie would crumble. That after her educational aspirations were shattered, after her dreams were methodically dismantled by my orchestration, she would finally accept her destined position, forever in the background. But my assumption proved catastrophically wrong. I had never witnessed such raw fury emanate from her. There were no dramatic outbursts, no tearful pleas, no desperate negotiations. She simply stared at me, her eyes blazing with a potent mixture of contempt and betrayal. Then, with deliberate steps, she exited the room, her movements measured yet resolute, as if she had just reached an irrevocable decision. I should have recognized the warning signs. But in that moment, I was consumed by smug satisfaction. Because I foolishly believed her powerless to alter what I perceived as inevitable. But the crucial detail I failed to grasp was, Grandpa Joe had orchestrated an alternative plan. In the subsequent days, Rosalie became practically invisible. She withdrew from family gatherings. She remained silent during my mother's endless wedding discussions. She departed the house daily, venturing to destinations nobody bothered to question. I interpreted her behavior as surrender. I couldn't have been more mistaken. That evening, while I sat in my room reviewing my wedding guest list, the front door creaked open. Rosalie entered, clutching a weathered brown envelope. Without acknowledging anyone, she placed it deliberately on the table before our parents. Grandpa Joe entrusted this to me. Her voice carried an unsettling composure. My mother's brow furrowed as she opened the envelope, extracting a handwritten letter. As she read, the color drained from her face. My father seized the letter, his eyes racing across the page, and then, his fingers clenched the paper until it nearly disintegrated in his grasp. What in God's name is this? I snatched the document from them. And as I absorbed its contents, my carefully constructed world disintegrated. Rosalie, if you're reading these words, you've discovered this when most needed. And it confirms, my predictions were accurate. I've observed this family's trajectory. I've witnessed your systematic marginalization. I knew they would eventually attempt to deny you your opportunity. I couldn't allow that. They believed I left you merely a college fund? How wrong they were. You're my chosen successor, Rosalie. Everything in my possession, including Maple Street Investment Group, all properties, and every company share, now belongs to you. Wield this responsibility wisely. Remember my fundamental lesson: numbers never deceive. Love, Grandpa Joe. I felt paralysis grip every fiber of my being. Rosalie hadn't just inherited a college fund. She had received everything. Grandpa Joe had bequeathed his entire empire to her. Not to my parents. Not to me. To Rosalie. I glanced at the bottom of the letter, where a business card was affixed: Arthur Bennett, estate attorney. No, this couldn't be real. Every calculated move, every meticulously crafted plan, all of it had become meaningless. No, this is impossible. My mother's voice cracked with hysteria. Joe would never do such a thing. My father, forever the epitome of composure, shattered for the first time in his life. He slammed the letter onto the table, his face a mask of unreadable darkness. We'll contest this legally, he declared, though his voice betrayed his uncertainty. He arranged everything meticulously, Rosalie stated, her voice now carrying unexpected strength. All assets were transferred before his death. It's irreversible. The reality of her words struck me like physical blows. You actually believe you can manage a company? I scoffed, though my voice wavered traitorously. Rosalie's response was a simple shrug. Grandpa thought so. My nails bit into my palms as I clenched my fists in rage. Everything that should have been mine now belonged to her. I had dedicated my entire existence to maintaining my position at the summit, preserving the perfect world my parents had constructed around me. But now Rosalie had emerged victorious. The fear had always lurked beneath my surface, that Rosalie would eventually break free from my shadow. I had always dreaded that her brilliance would render me insignificant. Now, that nightmare had materialized into reality. Rosalie was no longer just my little sister. She had become the one wielding absolute control. And I was left with nothing. I once believed myself untouchable. For years, I'd reigned as the family's golden child, the flawless daughter, my parents' crowning achievement. I never allowed anyone to surpass me. I ensured Rosalie remained trapped in my shadow. But now? I scrutinized Grandpa Joe's letter repeatedly, desperately searching for some error, some loophole. There was none. Rosalie, the sister I had spent years belittling and suppressing, now possessed everything. And me? I was left with nothing. In the aftermath of this revelation, my family imploded. My mother descended into hysterics, frantically contacting attorneys, desperately seeking ways to invalidate the will. My father, once the embodiment of unwavering confidence, sat motionless, his eyes vacant and lifeless. I couldn't bear to witness it. I fled the room, escaped to my car, and drove aimlessly, destination unknown. I simply couldn't stomach watching Rosalie stand resolute while our parents unraveled as their world collapsed around them. Because it wasn't just their world that had crumbled. Mine had, too. I pulled over on the side of the road, my thoughts a chaotic whirlwind. I had always followed a meticulously crafted blueprint for my life. I was destined to become James's wife, reside in an opulent mansion, carve out a distinguished career path, fulfilling every expectation my parents had carefully laid out. But now, that blueprint had been shredded to pieces. James abandoned me the instant he learned about the will's contents. I need someone with a secure future, Claudette. His words were devoid of any remorse. I wanted to scream that I was still Claudette Watson, the same woman he had once pursued relentlessly. Yet in my heart, I recognized the harsh truth: I had lost my identity. My entire existence had been constructed on a foundation of status, influence, and dominance. Now, that foundation had crumbled beneath me. I felt lost without my identity as the victor. 7 days later, Rosalie reached out. Can we talk? Initially, I intended to dismiss her message. But something inside me knew I couldn't avoid this confrontation forever. We arranged to meet at a quaint downtown cafe. Rosalie had transformed. Gone was the meek sister I once knew. Her eyes held a quiet but penetrating intensity. I assumed you'd want nothing to do with me, I remarked, my tone laced with bitter sarcasm. I don't, she confirmed. But there's something you need to hear. I sneered. Come to gloat about your triumph? Rosalie exhaled deeply. You're still missing the point, aren't you? My brow furrowed. What point? That I never saw this as a competition. You created this rivalry. You convinced yourself that my success somehow diminished yours. But that was never true, Claudette. I remained speechless. Your entire life has been about defending your position, Rosalie continued. But did you ever pause to consider what that position really meant? I inhaled deeply. For the first time ever, I truly heard Rosalie's words. I had always identified as the winner. Now I understood I had never truly achieved anything meaningful. I had been running, desperately trying to outpace my own insecurities. What direction do I take now? My voice was barely audible. Rosalie studied me, weighing her response carefully. Begin again. Begin again? I laughed mirthlessly. How? I've lost everything. That's exactly what I thought when my college fund disappeared, Rosalie replied. But I discovered my own way. You can do the same. For once in my life, words failed me. Rosalie rose from her seat, placing a small card on the table. When you're ready to change, go here. I stared at the card, a business training center. I let out a bitter laugh. You expect me to return to school? Rosalie's response was a simple shrug. You always claimed superiority over me, didn't you? Here's your chance to prove it. I watched her silhouette fade into the distance. For the first time, I confronted a haunting question: could I become someone worthwhile without trampling others along the way? The possibility of change terrified me. But one truth remained crystal clear: this path I'd been walking couldn't continue. I had always viewed Rosalie as my adversary. Yet perhaps she was never the real enemy. Maybe the true opponent had always been myself. I once wore the crown of victory. But now I stood among the defeated. Throughout my life, I had fought relentlessly to maintain my position at the summit, desperately clutching the title of the perfect child bestowed by my parents. I convinced myself that without standing above others, I would cease to exist. Yet when everything crumbled, when my hands grasped at empty air, I realized I had never truly possessed anything meaningful. My power had been nothing but a mirage. And Rosalie's presence had shattered that illusion completely. I twirled Rosalie's business card between my fingers, still wrestling with indecision. Is starting anew possible? Can I accept my dethronement from the center of the universe, embracing the challenge of rebuilding from scratch? Or will I remain chained to my past, desperately clinging to the very pride that orchestrated my downfall? The answers elude me. Perhaps I'm not ready to face them yet. But one certainty remains: I cannot continue being who I was. Perhaps some of you see yourselves reflected in my story. We're raised beneath crushing expectations, suffocating pressures, and rigid standards we dare not challenge. We're thrust into an endless competition where victory seems reserved for one. When others approach success, we instinctively drag them down. But have you paused to consider, is the victory worth its price? I dedicated my existence to protecting a meaningless title. In doing so, I sacrificed something invaluable: authentic relationships, genuine emotions, and the opportunity to become truly real. So I pose this question: are you pursuing something merely because you fear emptiness without it? If so, pause. Reflect. Question yourself: is this your genuine desire, or are you simply protecting your ego? Don't wait for complete loss to realize you never truly possessed anything. Can transformation be my reality? Would you, in Rosalie's position, offer forgiveness? Share your thoughts below. If this narrative sparked reflection, show your connection with a like. And if these reflections about family expectations, personal growth, and buried truths resonate with you, remember to subscribe to join our community of storytellers. Life resembles a complex chess match. One lost battle doesn't determine the entire journey. The vital question remains, what wisdom will you extract from your setbacks? Share your perspective in the comments below.